Please share where you're watching from and consider subscribing to the channel. The world was closing in. It was 2020, and as if a strange cosmic force decided that humanity had had enough of its so-called normal life, everything came to a halt. The COVID-19 pandemic forced people into isolation, sealed behind closed doors, and the world seemed like it was shrinking. Yet, for me, it was the perfect excuse to disappear. I was an avid backpacker and camper, and I figured if the world was going to shut down, I might as well use that time to experience the quiet solitude of nature in places I'd never been. One such place was Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado, a place of serenity, peace, and isolation. It seemed perfect, especially considering I was running from a storm of my own creation. Back in 2019, my life took a turn. An innocent mistake on my part led to things spiraling. I made a bad decision, one that cost a lot of people a lot of money, and as a result, my reputation was in tatters. I had to leave my job, change apartments, and even get a new phone number. People were angry. It wasn't just a fallout from work, it was personal. I'd been harassed for weeks. The calls came from numbers I didn't recognize, some threatening, others just cruel. For a while, I had no idea who was behind it. It felt like there was someone, maybe several people, watching me, mocking me. Eventually, the harassment died down. People either lost interest or moved on. But even as I began to regain my life, that unease never quite left me. The harassing texts had stopped, but they were still there, lingering in the back of my mind. That's why I left. I needed to get away, to feel like I could breathe again, to escape the walls I had built around myself. And so, I drove 3 hours to the Rocky Mountain National Park. I arrived at the park in the late afternoon, a time of day when the sun was low in the sky, and the light filtered through the trees in a soft, golden glow. There was no one else around. The pandemic had made sure of that. People were staying inside, and the park was quiet, with only the occasional gust of wind rustling the snow-covered trees. The temperature was cold, but it wasn't unbearable. A light dusting of snow covered the ground, enough to make every step crunch underfoot. I followed the trail toward the creek. It wasn't frozen, something I had expected given the season, but still it was beautiful. The water flowed over rocks, moving briskly as it wound through the park. I took a deep breath, letting the cool mountain air fill my lungs. It felt like a weight was lifting. I set up camp a little ways off the trail, finding a small clearing nestled near the creek. The wind had picked up slightly, and the cold crept in, but nothing I couldn't handle. After setting up the tent, I gathered some firewood and started a small fire to cook sausages on my camping stove. The flickering flame of the fire and the crackle of the burning wood added a sense of warmth, something I sorely needed. I sat down on a log and pulled out a book, hoping to get lost in its pages. After a few chapters, the sky had darkened enough for me to feel the full brunt of the cold, and I grabbed my headlamp. It wasn't long before I decided to light up a joint, something to take the edge off the isolation. As I inhaled, feeling the familiar warmth of the high begin to settle in, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting maybe a message from family, but my heart skipped a beat when I saw the number. It was from an unknown source, the area code 203, which I quickly realized was from Connecticut. The first message read, "How's your camping going, buddy?" I immediately froze. The phrasing felt strange, as if the sender wasn't asking as a simple acquaintance, but as someone who knew me. I stared at the screen for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Maybe it was a friend playing a prank. My stomach dropped as the second message came through. "It's beautiful out here. I see why you came up here." My hand trembled slightly as I pulled the phone closer to my face, the words jumping out at me. This wasn't just a random text. It felt like someone was watching me. They were here with me. I quickly typed back, "Who is this?" My mind raced, trying to think of anyone who could be sending these messages, but nothing came to mind. No one knew I was out here in the park, not unless they'd been following me. And if that was the case, if someone had been tracking me, then the feeling of isolation I had craved so much was already slipping away, replaced by a rising tide of paranoia. The coldness in the air seemed to intensify as I glanced around. The fire flickered, casting eerie shadows in the trees. I stood up and did a full 360-degree sweep of the camp, scanning the shadows with my headlamp. The wind howled in the distance, and I could almost imagine the world closing in. My phone buzzed again, pulling me back into reality. This time, the text read, "I know what you did." My pulse quickened, and my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a prank. Whoever it was knew something. I had to force myself to remain calm. Maybe it was just someone from the past, someone who had gotten my new number. But how could they know where I was? How could they know that I was camping in Rocky Mountain National Park? The weed had already started to make me feel lightheaded, and my thoughts began to spin out of control. I tried to steady myself, grabbing my P365 handgun from my bag. It was a comfort, a cold weight of reassurance in my hand. As paranoid as I felt, I couldn't ignore the creeping sense that someone was here, watching. The fire crackled, and I could hear the faint sound of branches shifting in the wind. I crawled into my tent, zipping it shut behind me. My heart raced, and the light from my phone illuminated my face as I stared at the messages. Minutes passed without any further replies. I tried to read, but the words blurred as I couldn't focus. Anxiety swirled in my gut, making it impossible to relax. I switched to watching YouTube videos, something to kill the time, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Then it came again, the phone buzzed. This time, the response was different. Doesn't matter anymore. My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was this a prank? But if it was a prank, how would they know I was camping here? I had to do something. I stood up, went to the entrance of the tent, and zipped it open just a crack, listening intently. The world outside had gone completely still. The wind was muffled now, the noise of the forest silent in a way that felt unnatural. I took a deep breath, clutching the gun tighter. Then, the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the snow broke the silence. They were slow at first, but they were getting closer, crunching in the frozen ground. My heart pounded in my chest, and I froze. The footsteps stopped just outside my tent, only about 6 feet away. I barely had time to process the sound when I saw a flash of light. Someone had shown a flashlight or taken a photo. My heart skipped a beat, and then the footsteps began to retreat, moving away slowly but steadily. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. My pulse was a pounding drum in my ears. Without thinking, I pulled the trigger twice, sending shots into the air. The sound of my own gunfire startled me, but I heard the unmistakable sound of someone running off into the distance. The snow crunched underfoot, and I quickly retreated back into the safety of my tent. My hands were shaking. I waited in silence, listening. The footsteps didn't return. I was 14 when I started going on walks alone. I'd leave the house early in the morning, not expecting to see anyone until I returned in the late afternoon, my shoes dirty from walking through fields and woods, my heart light. It wasn't that I didn't enjoy the company of others. It was just that the world felt quieter when I was by myself. The wind could speak to me more clearly. The sun seemed to shine in a way it didn't when I was with people, and everything, in that small, perfect bubble of solitude, seemed to make sense. That morning, like most others, was bright, the sun cutting through the leaves like liquid gold. I had decided to take a longer route through the woods behind my house. The path I chose was narrow, tangled with vines and the overgrown remnants of a forgotten trail. I had no specific destination, only the need to wander, to explore. I had done this before, but today something felt different. It wasn't the light. The sky was the same pale blue, the air warm and thick with the smells of earth and growing things. It wasn't the silence, which I loved. It was something else, something I couldn't place, but it had a sense of urgency, like a tremor beneath the ground, something waiting. And then I saw him. He was walking the opposite direction, his head turned slightly, scanning the trees as though looking for something. His movements were slow, deliberate, and he didn't seem to notice me at first. I didn't notice him immediately either. It wasn't until I passed him that I saw his face. A man, somewhere in his mid-30s, with wild eyes and a scruffy beard, wearing a tattered brown jacket that didn't fit the season. He was out of place in the forest, like a figure from a forgotten story. He turned as I walked past him, and his voice was sudden and raw. "Have you seen my dog?" I stopped in my tracks, caught off guard. My mind raced for an answer. No, I hadn't seen a dog. But why was he asking me? "Sorry, I haven't seen him," I said, instinctively trying to move on. But the man didn't let me. His hand shot out, grabbing my arm gently but firmly. His eyes were desperate now. "You sure? It's really important. I've been looking everywhere." I tried to pull away, but he wasn't letting go. "No, I haven't seen him," I repeated a little more firmly. "Maybe you should check further up the trail." But the man wasn't listening. His grip tightened slightly, and his voice dropped into a whisper. "Please help me find him. He's all I have." His breath was hot against my skin, too close for comfort. I didn't want to be rude, but I knew I needed to get away. His desperate, almost pleading tone didn't sit right with me. I nodded reluctantly. Okay, I'll help you for a bit. Where exactly did you last see him? He motioned toward the thicker part of the woods, his eyes bright with a kind of wild hope. Something inside me told me I was making a mistake, but my feet moved before my brain could stop them. We walked in silence for a while, the only sound being the crunch of dead leaves beneath our feet. As we made our way deeper into the trees, the man started speaking again, his voice low, urgent. He's a good dog, he said. I don't know what I'd do without him. I nodded, pretending to listen, though my instincts were screaming at me to turn around, to leave him behind. The further we walked, the quieter the woods became, as if they too were listening to us. Then I heard it. A snap. The distinct crack of a twig breaking underfoot. My heart stopped. I didn't know why, but I felt the shift, a deep, sudden unease curling in my stomach. It wasn't the woods anymore. It wasn't a place of peaceful solitude. It was something darker. The man, sensing my tension, turned to look at me. Are you okay? He asked, his voice unusually soft. You look scared. I nodded quickly, forcing a smile, my throat dry. I'm fine. I thought I heard something. I didn't wait for a response before I took a few steps back. I had no intention of letting him see the panic that was creeping up my spine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My body was telling me to run. But why? It was then that I heard it again, a rustling noise just ahead of us. I stopped. The man turned, his eyes widening. What was that? He whispered. I don't know, I replied, my voice trembling slightly. Maybe it's just a rabbit or something. But my words didn't feel convincing, even to myself. I looked around, my mind spinning, trying to rationalize my fear. There was something in the air, something heavy and wrong. The man seemed oblivious to the tension, his gaze now fixed on the trees ahead, his mouth moving slightly, as if he were counting the steps. I stepped backward, my senses screaming at me to leave. But before I could take another step, the man spoke again, this time his voice tinged with a quiet urgency. I found him, he said, a faint smile pulling at his lips. But he's caught in some branches. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or scared. Why was he so calm? Why didn't he seem to care how far off the trail we were getting? Okay, I said, trying to sound normal. Let's get him out. I turned to head further into the woods, but that's when everything changed. Without warning, he grabbed me, pulling me toward him. His hands were rough, too tight on my shoulders, his breath ragged in my ear. You're not going anywhere, he hissed. My heart slammed into my chest, my breath catching in my throat. I tried to break free, but his grip was iron. Let go of me. I gasped, my voice rising, panic making my words break. But he didn't listen. Instead, he pushed me hard into the thick underbrush, shoving me to the ground. I scrambled to get up, but he was already on top of me. His face was twisted, his eyes wild, and before I could scream, his hand shot out, covering my mouth. You don't understand, he whispered, his voice low and cold now. You don't understand what this means. He's not a dog. He's something much, much worse. I struggled, my hands pushing at his chest, but he was too strong. My thoughts scrambled, my brain fighting against the fog of panic. What was he talking about? What was happening? And then, as I tried to break free, I saw it. Just beyond the trees, barely visible in the fading light, two large, glowing eyes. I froze. The man saw the terror in my eyes and followed my gaze. He didn't move, didn't flinch, but something passed across his face, something darker, something almost satisfied. Don't worry, he said, his voice too calm. You'll understand soon enough. With all the strength I had left, I kicked out, hitting him square in the chest. For a moment, he faltered, giving me the fraction of a second I needed. I pushed myself up and ran, the adrenaline burning through me. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just needed to get away. I heard him behind me, but I didn't stop. My legs burned as I sprinted through the trees, my mind focused only on putting as much distance between me and him as possible. Finally, I stumbled out of the woods, my breath ragged, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't stop to look back, didn't stop to see if he was still following me. I kept running until I reached the road, until I saw the familiar shape of my house in the distance. Only then did I collapse, shaking on the side of the road. My thoughts were a tangled mess, but one thing was clear. I had narrowly escaped something terrible. The woods had always been a place of peace for me, but not anymore, not after what I saw. The woods were quiet that morning, or so I thought. The sky was a washed-out gray, the trees stark against the soft light, their branches reaching up like skeletal hands. The world felt empty. I'd driven out to metal detect on a secluded trail, an old military route forgotten by most, tucked away along the South Concho River in San Angelo, Texas. I could feel the cold in the air, crisp enough to bite, but not quite enough to deter me. The wind whispered through the trees as I pulled up to my usual spot, where the only things that had disturbed the earth were the ancient boots of soldiers long gone. The river gurgled gently in the distance, and the soil, rich and damp, pulled at my boots as I stepped out of the truck, the crunch of the gravel a solitary reminder of the world outside. It had been a few years since I'd been out here to this part of the woods, and my hands trembled with the familiar thrill of discovery. I grabbed my gear, a metal detector, shovel, and serrated knife, and began the trek through the brush. The trees around me were bare now, their trunks dark and slick with dew, but the air smelled of pine and damp earth, the kind of scent that made everything feel ancient, like the world was still holding on to the memory of something long forgotten. As I passed through the clearing and into the deeper woods, I noticed something unusual. A tent. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd find just lying around in a clearing, especially not one so secluded. Cans scattered the ground, and the remnants of a campfire lay smoldering. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine, but I shrugged it off. Maybe it was a passing hiker, or someone like me who needed a break from the world. But something about it made me uneasy, as if the camp hadn't been there for long. I didn't want to stay around too long, so I kept moving, heading for the military trail where I was sure the metal detector would find something interesting. Still, I couldn't shake the thought of the campsite. Someone had been here, someone who wasn't supposed to be. It didn't feel right. That's when I saw him. Middle psychological thriller. It was the sudden movement that caught my eye first. An old man, ragged, stepping out from the brush just a few feet away. I stumbled backward, startled, and for a moment, neither of us knew what to say. The sound of the leaves crunching beneath his boots felt too loud, too intimate, in that moment of silence. He looked as surprised to see me as I was to see him, and there was an awkward pause, the kind that comes when you realize you're not alone in a place you thought was deserted. I cleared my throat, trying to regain my composure. "What are you doing out here?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. The man blinked at me, his eyes dull, his clothes dirty and worn. He looked like he hadn't seen civilization in weeks, maybe months. He didn't speak at first, just looked me up and down as if trying to decide whether or not I was a threat. There was a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in his hands, which made me uneasy. He shifted from one foot to the other, his breath coming out in little huffs of white vapor. I'm just camping," he muttered. "I lost my job a while back and," he trailed off, his gaze shifting toward the tent behind me. "I've been here for a while. Haven't had much luck. Not much of anything." His words hung in the air, thick and uncomfortable. I didn't believe him. It didn't add up. People didn't just show up in the middle of nowhere like this, and the way he said it, almost apologetically, didn't sit right with me. "Have you been out here long?" I asked, my voice firmer this time. He gave a short nod, his eyes darting away, looking at anything but me. I glanced over at the tent again, noting the cans and the discarded clothes, wondering who else had been here. It wasn't just him. I could tell. There was something off about this whole situation. The air had thickened, weighed down by the strange tension between us. "I didn't mean to disturb you," the man continued, his voice more clipped now, as if he were trying to get rid of me, to make me believe his story. But something in his posture told me he wasn't telling the truth. There was something hidden behind his eyes, something dark, like a secret he couldn't keep anymore. "Have you been in the tent?" I asked, not sure why I was pressing him, but something inside me was pushing me to find out more. The man stiffened at my question, his eyes narrowing. He took a step closer to me, his gaze hardening. "I told you, I'm just here to." His words caught in his throat as I glanced at the tent again, then back at him. I hadn't meant to threaten him, but the way his body tensed, the way he looked at me, it was as though something was about to break, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to be around when it did. The air between us felt heavy now, each of us standing on the edge of something we both knew but hadn't spoken of. I took a slow step back, and he watched me, a glimmer of something strange flickering in his eyes. "I haven't touched anything," he muttered quickly, as if trying to convince himself more than me. "Just stay away from my stuff." I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, trying to back away without being too obvious. But before I could turn, he spoke again, his voice just above a whisper. "Don't go behind the tent," he said, almost pleading now, his voice low, as if sharing a warning, something I wasn't supposed to know. I looked at him, confused. "Why?" He didn't answer, just stared at me with wide, haunted eyes. I turned quickly, not bothering to hide the unease creeping up my spine. I didn't want to ask any more questions, didn't want to be near this man any longer. Ending horror. I quickly continued down the trail, hoping to distance myself from the campsite, from the man, but I couldn't shake the image of his face. The way his eyes had flickered, the tremor in his hands, the way he'd warned me not to go behind the tent. It haunted me, but the strange thing was, I didn't feel safe just walking away. Something tugged at me, some primal instinct urging me to go back, to see what he didn't want me to see. I tried to push the thought away, telling myself I was being irrational. I'd already started walking back to my truck, but my feet moved in the opposite direction, leading me right back toward the tent. I crept slowly, almost silently, back into the woods, my heart pounding in my chest. The air was thick with the smell of earth and damp leaves, and the trees seemed to close in on me as I approached the tent. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but when I pushed back the branches and peeked around the corner of the tent, my stomach lurched. There, beneath a patch of overgrown grass, was the freshly dug earth. A hole, small, just big enough for a body to fit. The sick realization hit me then. He had lied. He had buried something here. Someone, perhaps. My legs went numb, and I felt the bile rise in my throat. A part of me wanted to run, to turn and forget what I had seen. But I couldn't. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it all. And then, just as the last bit of light from the setting sun disappeared behind the trees, I heard him again. The man. He was standing just beyond the tent, his breath heavy in the air, his figure a dark silhouette against the fading light. "Leave," he whispered, but his voice wasn't pleading anymore. It was cold, detached. I didn't wait to hear more. I ran. The summer after I graduated high school, I decided to get away. I needed it, needed space, needed silence. So I packed up my things, grabbed some good food, and set off to camp alone in the woods near an old plantation. Just me, nature, and a few hours of peace. The thought of it filled me with anticipation as I drove. The world was thick with the scent of pine trees and damp earth, and the sun hung low in the sky, turning everything into a soft, golden glow. I set up my camp without much difficulty. My fire crackled as I prepared a stake over it, savoring the familiar sounds of the woods. There's something about being out here alone that calms me. The wind whispers through the trees, and all around, the world feels ancient. It's quiet, pure. I felt safe here, until I didn't. I hadn't noticed it at first, but slowly, a heavy feeling started to settle over me. The air had changed, thickened. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch farther than they should. I leaned in, my senses sharpening. It wasn't just the crackling of the fire, or the distant sound of leaves rustling in the wind. No, there was something else. Something large moving through the woods. Stomp, stomp, stomp. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. But the footsteps were too deliberate, too steady. They were coming closer. Slowly, methodically. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. Was it a bear? A deer? I grabbed my headlamp and swept it through the trees, heart racing. Nothing. No shape. No movement. But the sound continued. It was so close now I should have been able to see whatever was out there. But there was nothing. Only the unsettling silence of the woods and the heavy thudding of my heartbeat. My fingers tightened around the headlamp, my pulse pounding in my throat. I called out, "No, B. Is someone out there?" Nothing. The footsteps kept coming, relentless, growing louder, echoing around me. I couldn't take it anymore. A primal instinct kicked in. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the car, leaving everything behind. The fire was still burning brightly, sending flickering shadows into the night, but I didn't care. I couldn't stay. I had to get out. As I stumbled down the gravel road toward my car, the same sound followed me, growing louder with each step. The footsteps. I was desperate to get away, to leave this place behind. But I had to go back. The fire. I turned, my stomach twisting as I walked back toward the woods. The overgrown gravel road was my only option, the darkness closing in around me. The footsteps were still there, echoing in the stillness, like a drumbeat, relentless, as though the woods themselves were alive. The air felt heavier now, suffocating, and I was certain something was waiting just beyond the tree line. I made it back to the campsite, my abandoned camp. The fire had burned down, leaving behind only charred remnants of the stake I had left behind. The smell of burnt meat lingered in the air. I stood there, staring at the remnants of my peaceful escape, feeling the weight of the silence pressing in on me. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe an answer. Maybe the thing that had been stalking me would reveal itself. But all I could feel was the oppressive silence of the woods. The footsteps had stopped, but they hadn't really left, had they? They were still there, buried in the shadows. The next day, I returned with my brother. He didn't understand the unease that clung to the place, the way the air felt thick with something unseen. He was just glad I'd come back, glad to check on the fire. But I didn't want to be here anymore. I didn't want to stay. The next time I ran through those woods, I thought I'd prepared myself. It was late afternoon, the sun beginning to dip beneath the trees. I'd learned my lesson after the camping trip. Always get out before dark, always be aware. But as I neared the bend of the road, something caught my eye. A figure, standing still, watching. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't human, at least not in the way I understood. It was tall, almost unnaturally so, and it wore something like a robe, or perhaps the shadows were playing tricks on me. It didn't move. It didn't acknowledge me at all. It just stood there, blending in with the trees like it belonged there. The air around it felt heavy, thick, oppressive. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should approach or call out, but I didn't. I kept running, the dread growing in my chest, the heavy figure lingering in my peripheral vision as I sprinted toward the road. I veered off, abandoning the trail entirely, but the figure stayed in my mind. The way it had blended into the shadows. It had felt unnatural, wrong. That night, I found myself tossing and turning, the unsettling feeling still clinging to me. I hadn't told anyone about the figure, about the way the woods seemed to watch me. Who would believe me? I tried to forget, but the story that had been passed down from the old man at the plantation kept swirling in my mind. He'd sworn that, years ago, he and his friends had seen a Confederate soldier riding on horseback, but the rider was missing everything below his torso. They had laughed it off at the time, but now, I wondered if the man had been telling the truth, if something truly unnatural roamed the woods. And then the oddest thing happened. A thought flickered in my mind, one I couldn't quite ignore. What if the woods had always been like this, had always been alive with something that shouldn't be? Maybe I wasn't alone. Maybe I never had been. The Alaskan wilderness stretches out like an ancient memory, endless, timeless, and beautifully indifferent. There's a quiet magic to the air here, a heavy silence that wraps around the forest like a blanket, cushioning the world beneath it. I had always loved hiking, but this was different. This wasn't a casual jaunt through familiar paths. This was the kind of hike that took you out of the world and into something deeper. The kind that reminded you that the earth had seen more than you could ever understand, and in return, it didn't owe you anything. The trees towered above us, their roots deep in the earth like sentinels guarding a secret. The mountain breeze carried the scent of pine, damp moss, and something else, something wild, a reminder that this was their territory, not ours. I could feel the history of the land beneath my boots, the way it shifted underfoot, unyielding and ancient. It wasn't an easy hike, but we'd prepared. My friend and I, Tessa, were seasoned hikers, each step a dance with the rugged terrain. We talked idly as we walked, letting the rhythm of our feet keep our thoughts from wandering too far. We didn't come out here for anything other than the peace, the solitude, the way the world seems to pause when you're in the mountains. The only sounds were our footsteps and the occasional cry of a bird or rustle of leaves. But even in this stillness, there was something in the air, something almost imperceptible. A ripple of unease, unnoticed at first. A sense that we weren't truly alone. The path curved, and we kept walking unbothered, focused on the beauty around us. The towering trees seemed to stretch higher now, as though they were bending over us, leaning in closer, watching. The breeze picked up, but it didn't help. It only carried the chill deeper into my bones, making the hair on the back of my neck stand at attention. We rounded a bend, and that's when I saw them. At first, I thought it was an illusion, a trick of the light filtering through the branches. But no, there they were, two figures standing in the distance, blocking the path. Men. Strangers. They were staring at us, unmoving, as though they had been waiting. I stopped walking, my heart hammering in my chest. Tessa didn't notice right away. Her eyes were still on the ground, scanning the trail for loose rocks or dangerous footing. But I couldn't look away. There was something about them, their stillness, their silence. The way they didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were just fellow hikers. Maybe they had come out here for the same reasons we had. But the chill in the air wasn't from the wind. It was the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, the kind that tells you to run before you understand why. Tessa must have felt it too, because she looked up just then, and when she saw them, her expression shifted. Her eyes widened, and the smile she had been wearing faded. We both knew then that something wasn't right. I wanted to turn around, to walk back and pretend we hadn't seen them, but they were already moving. Slow at first, deliberate, their feet dragging, as though they weren't really walking, but being pulled forward. One of them, the taller one, had a strange look in his eyes, dark, hollow, as though something had died inside him. The other man was shorter, stockier, with a tight grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey!" I called out, my voice tight, strained. I didn't know what I was hoping for, a friendly greeting, an explanation, but instead, they just stood there waiting. "Do you need help?" Tessa asked, her voice cracking slightly. The taller man finally spoke, his voice low, gravelly, like the rustling of dead leaves. "We don't need help," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "But you do." The words didn't make sense. I didn't understand what he meant. The world felt wrong, twisted somehow, as though the trees around us had stopped breathing, waiting for something. "You shouldn't have come out here," the shorter man added, his smile stretching wider, too wide for comfort. "This isn't your place." I felt the blood drain from my face. The words hung in the air, suffocating me. They weren't here to ask for directions. They weren't lost. The taller man stepped forward, his eyes never leaving mine. His hand brushed against his side, and for a second, I thought he might be reaching for something sharp. A knife, maybe. I stepped back instinctively, but Tessa was already moving ahead of me, pulling me forward. "We're leaving," she said firmly, her voice steady, but I could hear the panic just beneath the surface. She grabbed my arm and tugged me along. "Let's go." But it was too late. The men had begun moving, their pace quickening. "Don't run," the taller one called out. His voice had a strange quality now, an almost soothing calmness to it, like a siren song that begged you to listen, to obey. "We won't hurt you, but you need to stay." I looked at Tessa, and in that moment, I saw the fear in her eyes. We weren't alone anymore. We weren't in control. We started running. The forest blurred around us, the path twisting and turning like a labyrinth. My breath was coming in short bursts, my legs burning from the effort. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't even think. All I could do was run, each step a desperate scramble to escape whatever it was that was chasing us. And then I heard it. A heavy footfall, a thud against the ground. Something was close behind. I didn't dare look back. I could hear the men now, their breath ragged, but the sound of it wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from all around us. And then we hit the clearing. The waterfall. Tessa stumbled, her foot catching on a rock, and she fell, rolling toward the edge. I reached out, my hands grasping her wrist, but she was slipping. I could feel her body sliding toward the water, the current too strong to fight against. "Hold on!" I screamed, panic making my voice break. But she wasn't responding, her hand loose in mine. She was falling. In that moment, I thought I would lose her. The water was cold, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter because I didn't feel the cold anymore. I didn't feel anything except the raw terror surging through me. I wasn't sure if I had pulled her back from the edge, or if the men had gotten closer, but the sensation of her slipping away from me haunted me. But then something changed. A figure appeared at the edge of the clearing, a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a rifle slung across his back. His eyes locked onto the two men, and I could see something shift in them. The fear I'd felt earlier, the suffocating tension, snapped in an instant. He didn't say a word as he raised the rifle, but the men stopped moving. They just stood there, the tension in the air thickening. The taller man's face contorted with rage, and his mouth opened as though to speak, but the hunter was faster. He fired. The shot rang out, loud and sharp against the silence of the trees, echoing in the mountains. The taller man dropped to the ground, his body crumpling. The shorter man turned and fled, but the hunter's eyes never left him, even as he disappeared into the woods. I stood there, frozen, as the hunter walked over to us. His movements were calm, methodical. He knelt beside Tessa, checking her for injuries. "You're all right now," he said, his voice low but reassuring. I nodded, not sure if I could trust my own voice. The provincial park in British Columbia was supposed to be the quiet retreat we needed. My partner and I had planned this camping trip to get away from the constant buzz of the city and experience something a little more raw, a little more real. Neither of us had ever been to this part of the park before, but we were both seasoned campers, so we didn't expect any trouble. The air was crisp, filled with the smell of pine and the distant scent of fresh rain. We arrived late in the afternoon, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The campground was surprisingly empty, with only a few other campers scattered about. We found our spot next to a small creek, a perfect place to pitch our tent. The sound of the water rushing over the rocks was soothing, and the quiet hum of nature settled into our bones like a lullaby. As we set up camp, the weight of the day seemed to fall away. The fire crackled to life as we gathered around, roasting marshmallows and chatting idly. The old man didn't come out of nowhere, exactly, but he did seem to materialize from the shadows of the trees. He wasn't part of the group of campers we had seen earlier, and there was something off about him from the start. He was tall, thin, and dressed in layers of old, mismatched clothes, as though he had been wearing the same outfit for years. His face was weathered, craggy with age, and his eyes were bright in a way that made me uneasy. He didn't smile when he approached us. Instead, he just stood at the edge of our camp, watching us, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. "Nice fire," he said, his voice rasping as though it hadn't been used in years. We both froze for a moment, not sure how to respond. We hadn't invited him over. He hadn't even made his presence known until now. Thanks," my partner said, her voice a little too high-pitched, a nervous edge creeping in. She looked at me for some kind of reassurance, but I couldn't find any. I didn't know why, but I just didn't trust him. The old man stood there for a moment longer, his eyes scanning our campsite. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was assessing us, measuring us somehow. "Sorry," he said, his voice softer now. "I didn't mean to disturb you. It's been a long time since I've seen anyone around here." I nodded, not really knowing what else to say. "It's a nice place," I offered, trying to make the best of the situation. "Yeah," he muttered, looking down at the ground. "I used to camp out here a lot, years ago, back when this place was different, more peaceful." "More," he trailed off, as if the words were too difficult to say. Then he looked up at us again, his gaze intense, as though he was trying to convey something that went beyond mere conversation. "There's something about this place, something that doesn't sit right anymore." We exchanged a glance, both of us unsure of how to react. The air between us felt thick, and his presence seemed to make the quiet of the forest feel heavier, more oppressive. "I'm just passing through," he continued, his voice steady now, but there was an odd quality to it. "Just looking for some company, I suppose. You wouldn't mind if I sat for a bit, would you?" We didn't know how to refuse. He wasn't threatening, not exactly, but there was something unsettling about him, about the way he carried himself, about the way he seemed so comfortable in this space where he didn't belong. "I'm okay with it," my partner said finally, clearly trying to be polite. "You can sit by the fire." The old man nodded slowly and took a seat a little too close to us. Too close for comfort, really, but we didn't move. He didn't speak for a while, just watched the fire flicker, the flames dancing in his cloudy eyes. After what felt like an eternity, he finally broke the silence. "It's not like it used to be," he said again, his voice more distant now, as though he were talking to himself. "You can feel it, can't you? The way this place, it feels like something's been taken from it." I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. He didn't seem crazy, but his words felt strange, out of place. And yet, there was a truth in them, something I couldn't ignore. The woods felt different. The air didn't feel as fresh as it had when we first arrived. It felt heavy. After a long pause, the man spoke again, his voice low. "You know, they say this place is haunted." I looked up at him, startled. "Haunted?" I echoed, not sure if I had heard him correctly. "Haunted," he confirmed, nodding slowly. "By the old ones. The ones who used to live here. Before the park was made. Before people started coming here and ruining it." I could feel my partner stiffen beside me. Her eyes darted to the trees, as if she were expecting something to leap out of the shadows at any moment. "There are things in these woods that you can't see," the old man continued, his voice growing softer. "Things that were here before you, before anyone. They're always watching, waiting." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I believed him, but the way he spoke, so calmly, so assured, made me hesitate. We stayed silent after that, both of us unsure of how to proceed. The man didn't seem to want anything from us, not directly, but his presence unnerved me more and more as the minutes ticked by. He wasn't just sitting with us, he was watching us, studying us like a scientist observing a curious specimen. Finally, my partner stood up. "We should probably turn in for the night," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's getting late." I nodded in agreement, relief flooding through me. It was time for this awkward interaction to end. The old man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he simply stared at the fire, his hands still clasped in his lap. I felt a pang of guilt for wanting to leave, but I couldn't ignore the chill that had crept into my bones, the sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. "We'll see you around," my partner added almost too quickly. She turned to me and gave me a small, uncertain smile, urging me to follow her. We retreated into our tent, and for a while we didn't speak. Neither of us wanted to admit that we both felt uneasy, that the presence of the old man had unsettled us more than we cared to admit. We lay in the dark, the sounds of the forest surrounding us, but the usual comfort of nature's noises felt distant now, as if they were coming from a faraway world. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of something outside. The tent flap rustled, a shadow moving just beyond the firelight. My heart leapt in my chest as I sat up, straining to hear. But then the noise stopped. Everything went still again. I wasn't sure if I had imagined it, but the feeling that something was wrong lingered, hanging in the air like a thick fog. In the morning, the old man was gone. His campfire was out, his things nowhere to be found. It was as though he had never been there at all. But I knew that wasn't the case. We packed up quickly, eager to leave the place that had started to feel like a trap, a place that no longer seemed safe, no longer seemed right. As we walked back to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see him standing there in the trees, watching us. When we got to the parking lot, the reality of the situation hit me. There had been a manhunt in the area recently, an escaped convict. I had heard about it on the news the previous week, but it hadn't clicked until now. The old man? He had fit the description perfectly. When I was a child, summers were a time of freedom, of endless days spent running wild, playing outside with friends, and hearing the distant echoes of adult voices as they called us in for dinner. But there was one place I remember more vividly than any other, a place that felt like it was carved out of another world. It was the summer camp, tucked away in the dense woods, where everything seemed larger than life, even the trees, which loomed overhead like guardians of some forgotten world. The camp had an air of mystery to it, a sense of adventure that buzzed in the air, making each day feel like an untold story waiting to unfold. But among all the camp counselors and the other kids, there was one man I remember more clearly than any other. Jack. He wasn't much older than a lot of the other counselors, but he carried himself with a quiet, confident ease that made him stand out. He had a way of looking at you, not just seeing you but understanding you, making you feel like you mattered. And that, as a kid, was something rare. I loved his attention, the way he seemed to make time for just me, as though I was the only one who existed in that moment. Each morning, I'd arrive early at the camp and find Jack sitting in the same spot, always grinning, his eyes twinkling. I'd walk over, and we'd play card games or board games while the other kids arrived, laughing and joking around in our little world. To me, he wasn't just a counselor. He was someone who genuinely cared, someone who made me feel special. It was intoxicating, the kind of attention every child craves but rarely gets. Over the weeks, as we grew closer, something shifted. It wasn't overt, not at first, but I began to notice how Jack's attention became more focused. He started to seek me out, even when it wasn't required. He'd find excuses to talk to me, to pull me aside during group activities. It didn't feel wrong at the time. It felt nice. He was just being kind, I thought. He made me feel important, and I basked in it, not understanding the subtle shift in his intentions. But then something happened that made me question everything. It was the day of the field trip, the one where we'd all pile into the camp's rickety old buses and head out to the lake for a day of swimming and games. I don't remember much about the trip itself, but I do remember the way Jack's eyes followed me, the way he would sneak glances when he thought no one was watching. I didn't understand then what I understand now. He was grooming me, slowly and methodically, making me feel like I was the only one who truly mattered. But it didn't feel wrong at the time. I was just a kid, caught in the spell of someone who made me feel seen. That night, after we returned from the field trip, things changed. I was walking back to my cabin, tired from the day's activities, when I ran into Jack in the woods near the edge of camp. He was waiting for me, like he always seemed to do. He smiled when he saw me, and I smiled back. But this time, something was different about the way he smiled. It wasn't warm, not like before. It was colder, more calculated. "Hey you," he said, his voice softer than usual, more intimate. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" I nodded, curiosity flickering in my chest. "Sure, Jack. What's up?" He gestured toward a patch of trees a little further away from the path, and I followed him. unsure of why he seemed so different. When we reached a secluded spot, away from the campfire's light and the other kids, he turned to face me. His eyes were locked on mine, and there was something in them that made my stomach twist. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're a special girl, you know that?" I nodded, unsure of what he meant. But I didn't pull away. "You're the only one who gets me," Jack continued, his eyes almost pleading. "You're different from the others. You've always been different. I've always liked that about you." At the time, I didn't know what he meant. It sounded flattering, but as I look back on it now, I realize how wrong it was. There was a predatory quality in the way he spoke, a manipulation masked by affection. He reached out then, placing his hand on my shoulder, just a little too intimately, a little too long. The warmth of his touch felt strange, like a hand brushing too close to something you couldn't escape. And when he spoke again, his voice was even softer, like a confession. "You're growing up so fast," he murmured. "I think you're going to be something amazing one day. I can see it. You've got this light in you, something others can't see." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, to run back to the safety of my cabin and forget this conversation. But another part of me felt honored, cherished even, in a way that only a kid could understand. And then that night, everything changed. I didn't see Jack again that evening. He disappeared into the camp, like he had many times before. But something inside me had shifted. That lingering touch on my shoulder haunted me as I lay in my bed, unable to sleep. I turned and twisted under the covers, unable to shake the image of his hand on my skin, the strange words he had said, the way he had looked at me. Days passed, but the unease didn't leave me. Jack's behavior became more erratic. He'd find ways to pull me aside, to talk to me when no one else was around. It was like he was trying to build some kind of secret bond between us, a bond that no one else could touch. I found myself dreading those moments, not understanding why my heart began to race when I saw him. But it didn't make sense. He was my camp counselor. He was supposed to be someone I could trust. He had made me feel important, like I mattered. So why did everything suddenly feel wrong? That summer, I learned something I should never have had to learn. I learned what it felt like to have someone manipulate you, to have someone use your trust against you. And I learned, too late, what it was to feel trapped in the web of someone's intentions. The last time I saw Jack, I was 12. He had been caught, finally. The whispers around camp started to make sense, the rumors that had always lingered in the background, the ones we were told to ignore. Jack was arrested for possession of illegal materials related to children, for grooming kids like me, for using his power over them in ways that no child should ever experience. The Everglades in winter are a different kind of wilderness, silent, still, and deceptively dangerous. The air was thick with humidity even though it was December, the subtropical landscape eerily calm as we drove deeper into the park. I'd been to the Everglades once before, but that was during the summer, when the heat was oppressive and the mosquitoes relentless. But now, it was cooler, with a welcome reprieve from the scorching sun. The thought of camping in the winter months seemed like the perfect escape. Little did we know, the cold would be the least of our concerns. I had invited my friends, Sam and Jake, along for what I had promised would be a serene camping trip. The Everglades were famous for their swamps and wetlands, and I'd mapped out a spot near a remote riverbend where we could fish, hike, and enjoy the isolation. The swamp's eerie beauty had always fascinated me. The mix of towering cypress trees and dense, twisting mangroves that seemed to hold ancient secrets. I thought the winter would offer us a calm respite. But as we set up camp in the early evening, something didn't feel right. We pitched our tents by the river, the dense thicket of trees surrounding us like silent sentinels. The air had that familiar dampness, and the subtle sound of distant birds echoed from the swamp. It felt peaceful at first, the gentle ripple of the water and the calls of herons and ibis filling the air. We built a fire and settled in to enjoy the warmth, trying to stave off the creeping chill as the sun dipped below the horizon. The temperature had started to drop, but it wasn't unbearable yet. By the time we ate and the fire was low, the night had descended quickly. The quiet was almost unnerving. In the Everglades, there's a strange stillness after dark, as if the wildlife retreats into the shadows and the air thickens with uncertainty. It wasn't until the temperature dropped further that things started to feel off. It was around 9 p.m. when Sam first noticed it. The wind had picked up, not the gentle breeze we were used to, but something sharper, colder. "We should have brought more layers," Sam muttered, rubbing his arms to fend off the growing chill. "I thought it was supposed to be mild this time of year. I replied, trying to shake off the discomfort gnawing at the back of my mind. Jake, the most laid back of the group, chuckled and tossed a log into the fire. It'll pass. Just a cold front coming through. But I wasn't so sure. Do you hear that? I asked suddenly, my voice cutting through the tension. Everyone went silent, straining their ears. The sounds of the forest had gone quiet. The birds, the insects, all of it had stopped. Only the wind seemed to speak now, howling through the swamp. I looked out into the dark, seeing nothing but the blur of the mist swirling in the distance. Probably just the wind, Sam said after a beat, his voice uncertain. But then there it was, a strange, low sound coming from the trees. It almost sounded like something moving through the swamp, but it wasn't the rustling of an animal. It was rhythmic, slow, deliberate. Is that something walking? Jake asked, his voice shaky. I stood up, suddenly feeling the weight of the silence around us. The night had swallowed us whole, and whatever was out there in the darkness was becoming more than just a vague sensation. It was real. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the edge of the trees, but the beam barely pierced the thick fog. There was nothing, just darkness. The sound of something, no, someone was moving closer. The rhythm of it was unmistakable. I could hear the wet slap of boots in the mud, heavy, deliberate steps. Who's out there? I called, my voice now trembling despite myself. There was no answer, only the sound growing louder. I turned back toward the fire. We need to get inside the tents. Now. Jake was already up, grabbing his things, his eyes wide with unease. We don't know who or what that is. Let's go. We scrambled to our tents, the cold seeping deeper into my bones as the wind picked up. I could hear the sound of something moving outside, pacing in the darkness. It was like the swamp itself was alive, pressing in on us. We huddled in our tents, shivering not just from the cold, but from the growing sense of being watched. It wasn't just the wind, or the sudden drop in temperature. It was something else. Hours passed. The noise outside never stopped. Every now and then, I'd hear footsteps too close for comfort, always just out of sight, moving like they were circling our camp. The air in my tent was thick with moisture, and despite the blankets, the cold was sinking deeper. My teeth chattered as I lay wide awake, unable to shake the feeling of something wrong. At some point, Sam broke the silence. I'm not going out there, not tonight. Whatever it is, it's not just a person. We're not dealing with a normal storm. The wind had picked up again, a howl that rattled the walls of the tents, making the entire camp seem to shudder. It felt like the Everglades were alive and angry. I don't know what's out there, I muttered, my voice barely a whisper, but I'm scared. We're trapped out here. It was when we heard the unmistakable sound of branches snapping, too loud, too deliberate, that we all froze. Something was out there. It was no longer a question. I reached for the emergency flare in my bag, but before I could light it, the sounds grew louder, closer. Something was moving through the swamp, fast, too fast to be human. Without thinking, I zipped my tent open, and just as I emerged, I saw it. In the distance, a figure moved between the trees, barely visible in the darkness, but unmistakable. Get back in the tents, I yelled, my voice hoarse with fear. Jake and Sam didn't question it. We all scrambled to pack up whatever we could in a frantic haze. It wasn't even about staying warm anymore. It was about survival. The sky had darkened further, clouds swirling ominously above us, and the temperature was dropping quickly. We couldn't stay here. The snowstorm hit with a brutal fury. It felt like we had been transported into another world. The snow wasn't like the snow I had seen in the mountains. This was thick, wet, and clung to everything, turning the world into a swirling white mess. Visibility dropped to nearly nothing. We had no choice but to leave the safety of the tents and try to make it to the nearest shelter. Another camp about 2 miles from where we were. The storm had turned everything into a treacherous mess. The trails we had walked earlier were now buried, invisible, and we had to move carefully, sticking close together. The cold was unbearable, sharp against our skin as we stumbled through the snow and mud, fighting the gusts of wind. It felt like the air itself was trying to freeze us. The trees loomed overhead like twisted, skeletal arms, and the swamp no longer felt like a tranquil wilderness. It was hostile, alien. It was the Everglades, and we were intruders. We lost track of time, our bodies numb with cold, our thoughts clouded with the storm's rage. At some point, we reached the other camp, barely able to stand. We collapsed into a small cabin that was barely standing, the walls thin but enough to keep the worst of the wind out. We huddled together, our bodies shaking from the cold, unable to speak for a long time. We had made it. Barely. The storm continued to rage outside, but we were safe for now. We had survived, and that was all that mattered. We should have never gone into those woods. I can still hear her scream, and it's too late to undo what happened. We were supposed to be camping, simple as that. A weekend to relax, escape, disconnect. But somewhere along the way, everything slipped into darkness. Let me share. It had started out like any casual camping trip. My friends and I had been cooped up in the city for weeks, and we needed a break, something to get away from the noise, the constant hum of life. We drove up to a small patch of woods, nestled between a housing development that had been growing rapidly and the outskirts of an even bigger town. It was quiet there, isolated enough that it seemed like a good spot to spend the night. We set up our camp late in the afternoon, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky. The trees around us were tall, their trunks thick and gnarled, reaching up like hands trying to touch the heavens. We joked, we laughed, we made our usual campfire food, and everything felt perfectly ordinary. But then, just as the fire started to die down, we heard it. A scream. It was far off at first. The kind of thing that could have been mistaken for an animal, maybe a deer or a fox caught in a trap. But this scream, it wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. It was too human, too raw, too desperate. I looked at my friends, trying to hide the unease that crawled up my spine. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice low, uncertain. Everyone froze. Another scream, but this one was louder, closer, and unmistakably a woman's voice. There was no mistaking it now. Someone was in trouble. "We should check it out," Sam, the brave one of the group, said. "It could be someone in danger. We can't just ignore it." "Are you serious?" Chris, always the skeptic, shot back. "We're in the middle of nowhere. It could be an animal or someone messing with us. Why would we go into the woods in the dark?" But Sam had already stood up, and the rest of us, hesitant but unsure of how to protest, followed. We couldn't see much beyond the faint outline of the trees, their branches twisting like skeletal hands in the moonlight. The air felt different here, heavy and charged with something we couldn't name. Something had changed. "Stay close," Sam warned, his voice grim. We moved deeper into the woods, our steps crunching over the dry leaves and twigs. The sound of the scream echoed again, cutting through the air like a blade. It was closer now, almost directly ahead of us. I wanted to turn back. My instincts screamed at me to go, to forget this, to let the police deal with whatever was out there. But we kept moving forward, like moths drawn to the flame of some invisible danger. And then we saw her. She was standing in the clearing, her back to us, her head tilted up toward the sky as though she were listening to something we couldn't hear. Her clothes were torn, dirt streaked across her face, and her hair was matted with what looked like blood. She didn't seem to notice us at first, just swaying slightly, as if in some kind of trance. "Hey!" Sam shouted, his voice shaking slightly. "Are you okay?" She turned slowly, her movements unnatural, jerky, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. Her eyes locked onto Sam's, and in that instant, I felt a chill run through my bones. Her gaze wasn't just empty, it was dead, hollow, like there was nothing behind those eyes anymore. "Run," she whispered, her voice rasping, as if she hadn't spoken in years. "Run now." Before we could react, she screamed again. This time, it was a guttural, animal-like wail, a sound so visceral, so filled with pure terror, that it seemed to shake the very air around us. It was like the forest itself screamed with her, the wind howling and the trees shuddering. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Something was wrong, so wrong. I wanted to run, to escape, but my legs wouldn't move. Then, before any of us could speak, the forest came alive. A noise like the tearing of fabric filled the air, and something large and heavy moved through the trees, crashing toward us. "What the hell is that?" Chris hissed, his voice barely audible over the sound of cracking branches and rustling leaves. The woman's face twisted into a grin, but it wasn't a normal grin. It was wide, unnatural, like she wasn't human anymore. Her lips curled back over sharp teeth, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw something other than human in her eyes. Something monstrous. And then, from the shadows, it appeared. It wasn't a person. Not really. It looked like a person, but its skin was pale, stretched too tight over its bones. Its arms were long, too long, and its fingers ended in sharp claws that scraped against the bark of the trees. Its face was pale, like death itself, with deep, hollow eyes that looked straight through us. Its mouth was filled with rows of jagged teeth, and a low growl rumbled in its chest as it stepped into the clearing. I couldn't breathe. Sam backed away first, stumbling, his breath coming out in sharp gasps. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The creature turned its head slowly, its eyes locking onto Sam, and then it made a sound, an awful guttural noise like something caught between a growl and a hiss. "Run!" I shouted, my voice raw with panic. But the woman's voice stopped us cold. "You can't escape," she said, her voice high-pitched, almost childlike. "It's too late for you." That was all we needed. In a burst of adrenaline, we turned and ran, the sound of the creature's footfalls behind us like a thunderous drumbeat. We crashed through the woods, branches whipping at our faces, the ground beneath us uneven and unforgiving. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding as I pushed myself faster. But I could hear it, the creature, the woman, the things in the woods, chasing us. The world blurred around me, the trees and shadows blending together as we ran, and then, out of nowhere, the clearing appeared again. The one we had just left. The woman. The creature. But this time it wasn't the same. The woman was gone. The creature was nowhere to be seen. The woods were eerily still, the quiet oppressive, like we were walking through a world that no longer cared if we existed. We had somehow stumbled back to the place where everything had gone wrong. "Where did they go?" Sam gasped, his voice shaking as he glanced around, the fear still present in his eyes. "What the hell is happening?" We stood there, frozen, unsure of whether to move or to wait. We didn't understand what had just happened. We didn't understand the creature, the woman, or what they had wanted with us. We didn't know if they were still watching, waiting for us to make the wrong move. And then we heard it, a rustling, distant at first, but growing closer. I turned, my eyes scanning the trees, my heart in my throat. Something was coming, something else. "We need to go. Now." But as we started to run again, we heard the woman's voice, soft and sweet, carried by the wind. Run as far as you can," she whispered. "But you'll never leave. You're part of the forest now." We ran until we couldn't run anymore, until our legs were numb and our bodies screamed for rest. When we finally made it to the edge of the woods, we found ourselves standing in front of a road that we didn't recognize. The headlights of a car flashed in the distance, the world feeling more surreal than real. It felt like the forest had swallowed us whole, and we had somehow clawed our way out. The Alaskan wilderness stretches out like an ancient memory, endless, timeless, and beautifully indifferent. There's a quiet magic to the air here, a heavy silence that wraps around the forest like a blanket, cushioning the world beneath it. I had always loved hiking, but this was different. This wasn't a casual jaunt through familiar paths. This was the kind of hike that took you out of the world and into something deeper. The kind that reminded you that the earth had seen more than you could ever understand, and in return, it didn't owe you anything. The trees towered above us, their roots deep in the earth like sentinels guarding a secret. The mountain breeze carried the scent of pine, damp moss, and something else, something wild, a reminder that this was their territory, not ours. I could feel the history of the land beneath my boots, the way it shifted underfoot, unyielding and ancient. It wasn't an easy hike, but we'd prepared. My friend and I, Tessa, were seasoned hikers, each step a dance with the rugged terrain. We talked idly as we walked, letting the rhythm of our feet keep our thoughts from wandering too far. We didn't come out here for anything other than the peace, the solitude, the way the world seems to pause when you're in the mountains. The only sounds were our footsteps and the occasional cry of a bird or rustle of leaves. But even in this stillness, there was something in the air, something almost imperceptible. A ripple of unease, unnoticed at first. A sense that we weren't truly alone. The path curved, and we kept walking unbothered, focused on the beauty around us. The towering trees seemed to stretch higher now, as though they were bending over us, leaning in closer, watching. The breeze picked up, but it didn't help. It only carried the chill deeper into my bones, making the hair on the back of my neck stand at attention. We rounded a bend, and that's when I saw them. At first, I thought it was an illusion, a trick of the light filtering through the branches. But no, there they were, two figures standing in the distance, blocking the path. Men. Strangers. They were staring at us, unmoving, as though they had been waiting. I stopped walking, my heart hammering in my chest. Tessa didn't notice right away. Her eyes were still on the ground, scanning the trail for loose rocks or dangerous footing. But I couldn't look away. There was something about them. Their stillness. Their silence. The way they didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were just fellow hikers. Maybe they had come out here for the same reasons we had. But the chill in the air wasn't from the wind. It was the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, The kind that tells you to run before you understand why. Tessa must have felt it too, because she looked up just then, and when she saw them, her expression shifted. Her eyes widened, and the smile she had been wearing faded. We both knew then that something wasn't right. I wanted to turn around, to walk back and pretend we hadn't seen them, but they were already moving. Slow at first, deliberate, their feet dragging, as though they weren't really walking, but being pulled forward. One of them, the taller one, had a strange look in his eyes, dark, hollow, as though something had died inside him. The other man was shorter, stockier, with a tight grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey!" I called out, my voice tight, strained. I didn't know what I was hoping for, a friendly greeting, an explanation, but instead, they just stood there waiting. "Do you need help?" Tessa asked, her voice cracking slightly. The taller man finally spoke, his voice low, gravelly, like the rustling of dead leaves. "We don't need help," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "But you do." The words didn't make sense. I didn't understand what he meant. The world felt wrong, twisted somehow, as though the trees around us had stopped breathing, waiting for something. "You shouldn't have come out here," the shorter man added, his smile stretching wider, too wide for comfort. "This isn't your place." I felt the blood drain from my face. The words hung in the air, suffocating me. They weren't here to ask for directions. They weren't lost. The taller man stepped forward, his eyes never leaving mine. His hand brushed against his side, and for a second, I thought he might be reaching for something sharp. A knife, maybe. I stepped back instinctively, but Tessa was already moving ahead of me, pulling me forward. "We're leaving," she said firmly, her voice steady, but I could hear the panic just beneath the surface. She grabbed my arm and tugged me along. "Let's go." But it was too late. The men had begun moving, their pace quickening. "Don't run," the taller one called out. His voice had a strange quality now, an almost soothing calmness to it, like a siren song that begged you to listen, to obey. "We won't hurt you, but you need to stay." I looked at Tessa, and in that moment, I saw the fear in her eyes. We weren't alone anymore. We weren't in control. We started running. The forest blurred around us, the path twisting and turning like a labyrinth. My breath was coming in short bursts, my legs burning from the effort. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't even think. All I could do was run, each step a desperate scramble to escape whatever it was that was chasing us. And then I heard it. A heavy footfall. A thud against the ground. Something was close behind. I didn't dare look back. I could hear the men now, their breath ragged, but the sound of it wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from all around us. And then we hit the clearing. The waterfall. Tessa stumbled, her foot catching on a rock, and she fell, rolling toward the edge. I reached out, my hands grasping her wrist, but she was slipping. I could feel her body sliding toward the water, the current too strong to fight against. "Hold on!" I screamed, panic making my voice break. But she wasn't responding, her hand loose in mine. She was falling. In that moment, I thought I would lose her. The water was cold, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter because I didn't feel the cold anymore. I didn't feel anything except the raw terror surging through me. I wasn't sure if I had pulled her back from the edge, or if the men had gotten closer, but the sensation of her slipping away from me haunted me. But then something changed. A figure appeared at the edge of the clearing, a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a rifle slung across his back. His eyes locked onto the two men, and I could see something shift in them. The fear I'd felt earlier, the suffocating tension, snapped in an instant. He didn't say a word as he raised the rifle, but the men stopped moving. They just stood there, the tension in the air thickening. The taller man's face contorted with rage, and his mouth opened as though to speak, but the hunter was faster. He fired. The shot rang out, loud and sharp against the silence of the trees, echoing in the mountains. The taller man dropped to the ground, his body crumpling. The shorter man turned and fled, but the hunter's eyes never left him, even as he disappeared into the woods. I stood there, frozen, as the hunter walked over to us. His movements were calm, methodical. He knelt beside Tessa, checking her for injuries. "You're all right now," he said, his voice low but reassuring. I nodded, not sure if I could trust my own voice.